edge of a slow-moving bayou, where the water reflected the sky like a sheet of dark glass. An old fishing shack stood on weathered wooden posts. The shack had been there for so many years that even the cypress trees seemed to accept it as part of the landscape. Moss hung from the branches above like soft curtains, and reeds whispered whenever a gentle breeze passed through. This is the story of a grandfather and a grandchild spending a peaceful day together on that bayou. No one hurried. No one had anywhere else to be. The morning began before the sun fully climbed into the sky. A thin layer of mist floated over the water, drifting slowly between the trees. The air was cool and comfortable. The sounds of distant birds echoed across the wetlands, while frogs settled into silence after a long night of singing. The grandfather sat quietly on the porch of the fishing shack. Time had left gentle marks upon his face. His movements were steady and unhurried, like someone who had learned that life often moved at exactly the pace it needed to move. Beside him sat his grandchild, curious and calm, watching the bayou awaken. Together they prepared their fishing lines. There was no rush in their work. The tackle box opened with a familiar creak. The fishing poles were checked one final time. Small details received patient attention. The bayou seemed to approve of this careful rhythm. When everything was ready, they settled onto 2 wooden chairs at the edge of the shack's dock. Their fishing lines slipped quietly into the still water, and then they waited. The waiting was not empty. The waiting was the experience. Minutes drifted by like leaves floating downstream. A turtle appeared near the surface and glided silently through the reflections. Dragonflies moved above the water, their wings catching the first golden rays of sunlight. Somewhere farther into the swamp, a heron lifted gracefully into the air and disappeared between the trees. The grandfather watched these things with quiet appreciation. The grandchild watched them too. The bayou had a way of teaching patience without ever speaking. As the morning continued, sunlight spread across the landscape. The mist gradually disappeared, revealing winding channels of water stretching into the distance. Every direction seemed to hold another hidden corner waiting to be explored. The fishing shack itself felt like a small world apart from everything else. Its wooden boards carried memories of countless seasons. Summer storms had rattled its walls. Gentle rains had tapped against its roof. Warm afternoons and cool evenings had passed through its open windows, year after year. The shack had remained. The grandfather knew many stories connected to this place. Stories of fish that nearly escaped. Stories of storms that arrived suddenly. Stories of mornings so quiet that the water looked perfectly motionless for hours. Even without words, those memories seemed present in the air around him. The grandchild sensed them too. The fishing lines rested peacefully in the water. Occasionally, a ripple spread outward from some unseen movement below. Each ripple expanded into circles that slowly disappeared into stillness again. Watching the water became its own kind of meditation. Nothing demanded attention. Nothing interrupted the calm. The bayou simply existed. As the sun rose higher, gentle warmth filled the air. The scent of fresh water, damp earth, and cypress wood drifted through the breeze, Insects hummed softly among the reeds. The distant calls of birds blended into a natural melody. The grandfather leaned back slightly in his chair. The grandchild followed a floating leaf as it wandered across the surface of the water. Time felt different here. Hours did not feel like hours. They felt like moments unfolding slowly and naturally. Around midday, clouds drifted lazily overhead. Their reflections moved across the bayou like giant ships sailing through another world beneath the water. The fishing shack cast a comfortable patch of shade across the dock. The grandfather and grandchild remained there together. Sometimes they focused on the fishing lines. Sometimes they watched the clouds. Sometimes they simply listened. The sounds of the bayou were never exactly the same from one moment to the next. A breeze might rustle the reeds. A fish might break the surface for an instant. A bird might call from deep within the trees. Then silence would return. Not an empty silence, a peaceful silence. The kind that settles gently around a person and invites them to relax. The afternoon drifted onward. Sunlight filtered through Spanish moss, creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted slowly across the dock. The water carried those patterns away in shimmering reflections. Nearby, a family of ducks emerged from a hidden channel and paddled quietly across the bayou. Tiny ripples spread behind them in neat lines. The grandchild watched them disappear into the reeds. The grandfather watched too. The ducks left no lasting trace, yet somehow the moment felt complete. That was one of the lessons of the bayou. A beautiful moment did not need to last forever. It only needed to be noticed. Far away, beyond the trees, the world continued with its schedules and responsibilities. But here, at the fishing shack, none of that seemed important. The bayou asked for only one thing: attention. Gentle attention. The kind that allows a person to notice small details, the movement of sunlight, the shape of a cloud, the reflection of a tree, the slow drift of water. As afternoon slowly softened toward evening, the air became cooler once again. Long shadows stretched across the dock. The sunlight turned golden and rich, bathing everything in warm color. This was one of the grandfather's favorite times of day. The bayou seemed to relax even further. Birds settled into the trees. The breeze became lighter. The water grew smoother. The fishing lines rested quietly. Whether fish were caught or not no longer mattered. The day itself had been the reward. The grandchild leaned against one of the dock posts and gazed across the water. The grandfather sat nearby. Neither seemed eager for the day to end. The bayou had given them something difficult to find elsewhere: stillness. Not merely the absence of activity, a deeper kind of stillness, the kind that settles into thoughts and eases tension from the mind. As evening approached, the sky began its slow transformation. Blue faded into gold, gold deepened into orange, orange softened into pink. The water reflected every color. The entire bayou seemed to glow. The fishing shack stood quietly within the beauty of the moment. Its weathered boards appeared almost golden in the fading sunlight. The grandfather looked out across the water. The grandchild did the same. Together, they watched the day gently close. One by one, evening sounds emerged. Frogs began their nightly chorus. Crickets joined from the grass. The distant call of a night bird echoed across the wetlands. The bayou was changing shifts. Day creatures settled down. Night creatures awakened. The transition happened so gradually that it felt almost dreamlike. Soon the first stars appeared overhead. Tiny points of light reflected faintly on the water below. The fishing lines had long since been reeled in. The chairs remained on the dock. The grandfather and grandchild stayed a little longer. There was no need to hurry indoors. The evening air felt peaceful. The sky grew darker. More stars appeared. The moon rose above the trees, casting a silver pathway across the surface of the bayou. Everything seemed softer beneath moonlight. The reeds, the water, the moss-covered branches, even the fishing shack itself. The old structure looked timeless beneath the stars. As darkness settled fully over the landscape, the bayou became a place of quiet mystery. Gentle ripples moved through moonlit reflections. Frogs sang steadily. A breeze touched the surface of the water and disappeared. The grandfather and grandchild remained together in peaceful companionship. No words were necessary. The bayou had already provided everything that needed to be said. The night deepened. The stars brightened. The water continued its slow and patient journey through the wetlands. Somewhere nearby, fish moved beneath the surface. Owls watched from hidden branches. Small creatures explored the edges of the marsh. Life continued calmly all around. The fishing shack stood watch over it all. Patient, steady, comfortable, just as it had for many years. Eventually, the grandfather and grandchild stepped inside the shack. A lantern cast a warm glow across the wooden walls. The room felt simple and welcoming. Outside, the bayou continued its quiet song. Inside, peace settled like a blanket. The day had been filled with small moments. A drifting leaf, a passing turtle, a family of ducks, golden sunlight, moonlit water. Simple things. Yet those simple things often become the moments remembered longest. As the lantern light flickered gently, the sounds of the bayou blended into a soothing rhythm. Water moving softly, crickets singing, frogs calling, wind brushing through moss-covered trees. A natural lullaby. The grandfather rested comfortably. The grandchild rested too. Outside, the stars watched over the bayou. The fishing shack stood peacefully beneath them, and the slow-moving water carried reflections of moonlight far into the darkness. The night remained calm. The bayou remained patient. And somewhere beyond dreams, another quiet morning waited to arrive. Until then, The water flowed gently. The reeds swayed softly. The stars shimmered above, and the fishing shack rested peacefully beside the bayou, holding its memories, its stillness, and its quiet promise that tomorrow would arrive just as gently as today. The end.